You're watching or listening to Strangers in Space, and for the next 3/4 of an hour, we're going to be talking about the church on Ruby Road, so you don't have to. Hi, I'm JR.
I'm John.
And I'm always Matt.
Yeah, I'm always JR too. John, are you always John?
Usually.
Or sometimes you're Welsh Ian, though, right?
Yeah. Oh, only
so-
when Matt's in charge.
Fair enough. The church on Ruby Road, then. Have we all watched it just the once, or have any of us watched it twice? I watched it twice.
Really?
I've done the visual commentary as well. So, technically twice.
Oh, Christ. I've watched it once, but I have watched Doctor Who Unleashed with the very, very Welsh presenter.
Oh, really? See,
Even Welsh than me, yes.
I've not watched Unleashed or the commentary or anything else. I've just watched the episode twice. So that's where we stand. We're doing this on Boxing Day, first thing in the morning, and we all have a little bit more experience than just one viewing of it. But what did we think, Matt? In a nutshell, what did you think?
I'm struggling to get into it, but I always do with Christmas specials until about 5 or 6 years have passed. I suspect when 5 or 6 years have passed, I'll still be slightly struggling because it is an RTD Christmas special, which means generic London settings with Cardiff filling in for them, and one token sort of semi-urban church. So that's my initial thought, but I might get into it. Oh, and Ncuti Gatwa was very good. I did like Ncuti Gatwa. Okay.
Yeah.
Everybody likes Ncuti Gatwa.
And Millie Gibson?
I less to judge in this one. I think companions tend to be a slow burn during the season. I think their characters develop, but obviously the Doctor's character's there, so it's whether the actor can inhabit the Doctor, and he does. So I'm not judging Millie Gibson at the moment.
Oh, absolutely. And for once in his first episode, he arrives fully formed, rather than this is the Christmas invasion or the 11th hour, where we get to know him in the episodes after. For once, he's all there.
Yeah. So,
I mean, apart from anything else that might be added to the mix afterwards, but he's sort of fully formed, really. John, what did you think?
Yeah, I agree with Matt on the on Ncuti Gatwa. It felt a different, even to something like The Giggle to me. So I was, for the first sort of half hour, I was kind of working my way into it, but I was there in the end. I'm I think it's one of those that if you rewatch it, it gets better because you know what to expect from the tone of the episode.
Fair enough. I rewatched it and it got worse. I didn't like it much on first go either, to be honest. I love him. I like her.
Everybody loves him.
Yeah, those two are really great. I just thought the material was terrible. And I suppose we'll get into that. It had some nice moments and some nice things. But overall, I just thought it was... I mean, I was sitting with a 9-year-old and the rest of the family, and we were all laughing for about the first 20 minutes at the appropriate bits where you're supposed to laugh, which wasn't a massive amount, but you're thinking, well, as long as this goes somewhere and, get somewhere. But about halfway through, the 9-year-old turned to me and said, "This isn't a very good episode of Doctor Who, is it, Dad?" And
he's your child, isn't he?
And the rest of us found it hard to disagree. I think, but the point is, there's kind of 2 or 3 things going on here. Matt, did you listen to the episode I did with Dylan, where and John was on that one, weren't you, John?
Yep.
Where we talked about the sort of the specials in a kind of retrospective.
Yeah. I listened past the point where you accused me of expecting a multi-Doctor story in Wild Blue Yonder, which I never have, and then I listened up to the point where I was shouting at the podcast, trying to argue back against things that were made. And
waste of time doing that, Matt. You've got to be on the podcast.
Yes. Well, yeah. I listened to bits of it.
Did you get as far as where I talked about RTD repurposing Doctor Who to fit in a channel, a streaming service where you've got Marvel and Star Wars?
Yes. Yeah.
So I think this was further evidence of that. on top of that, also, this is an introductory story, and we know what RTD's introductory stories are like, right? John, you've written about Rose, and I don't know, Partners in Crime seems to be like the paradigm. And I guess there was a bit of Smith and Jones going on because there's a sort of time travel aspect here. So he does the thing with the tie in Smith and Jones. Here it becomes more fundamental to the story. So there's that going on too. And then on top of that, and I think I also talked about this, is that Russell T Davies is now doing Doctor Who, having seen how Chibnall and how Moffat did Doctor Who. So this ties in very much to the Timeless Child thing. In fact, this is very much Russell T Davies trying to do something circular and paradoxical, like the way Stephen Moffat does it. And this is sort of RTD's, or it feels like it's supposed to be RTD's version of that, but the circular paradox doesn't work. So it just feels like a really weird sort of thing he's tagged onto it. But he's also taken the Timeless Child thing, which is where the Doctor is an orphan, and he seems to be repurposing the companion here as an analogue for the Timeless Child by way of Stephen Moffat's Impossible Girl. So it seemed like an awful lot of things sort of going into the mix in terms of what the influences were on what made the episode. It just felt like he didn't actually bother to include a story of any kind.
I think you're probably giving him too much credit for like bringing in things of the past and setting up analogues and metaphors. I think he's setting up Ruby as being a mysterious companion with a mysterious past, with a mystery to be solved, and then putting the Doctor at the moment of that mystery, which obviously that's going to be an ongoing thing, which is fine, but it's not a new thing. I mean, he's done it before, and Moffat's done it, and
for sure,
the companion with the mysterious past isn't a new thing.
But he's doing it in a Moffat way here, because what Russell T Davies usually does is reveals that there was a mystery at the end. So he introduces the companion without the mystery present, and then later on it turns out there's a mystery, and then right at the end it turns out, oh, the mystery was the companion all the time. So we find out that Doctor was the Dr. Donna only in episode 13. We found out that Rose was the Bad Wolf only in episode 13. The way Moffat does it is he introduces the companion with the mystery. And that's what Russell T Davies is doing here, whether deliberately or by accident, but he's doing it in the way that Stephen Moffat did, is kind of my point. And I'm not saying he's trying to do a Stephen Moffat, but what I'm saying is he's doing Doctor Who that reflects the Doctor Who that we have had for the past 15 years, rather than trying necessarily to just be a reinvention. So it is a reinvention for Disney in that sort of Roald Dahl sense I talked about, that positions it away from Marvel and away from Star Wars.
I mean, that's the other bit that I don't think that Russell T Davies writes with that degree of kind of cynical kind of audience. I think Russell T Davies is writing purely as Russell T Davies now. I think he's got to the stage where he's got enough either self-confidence or arrogance, depending on which bit of Twitter you're reading, to just write his episodes as he thinks they'll work or knows they'll work, and then he presents them. But this time, this is the first time I didn't see it in the three specials. I thought they held together really well, and I thought the jokes all worked, and I thought the dialogue worked. This time I can start to see cracks in that approach, like illogicalities throughout, and like I loved the gloves. I thought the gloves were a great idea, but then they spend about 5 minutes hanging on a ladder explaining how the gloves work, just so they can set up the gloves for the end, but they don't really set up the gloves for the end necessarily.
Yes, the middle of an action scene, and he stops to do an entire conversation about how the gloves work in the middle of an action scene.
Fostering on Christmas Eve or the day before Christmas Eve, and then they had to put in a bit of what looked like maybe ADR or maybe not, just to explain why suddenly the fostering service had suddenly started working that close to Christmas.
In fairness, it's like Donna getting married on Christmas Eve back in.
That happens though. You can
very rarely. There's two weddings in a church at Christmas Eve.
But Donna getting married relied on the availability of a vicar in a church. Fostering relies on a vast administrative team and going through lots of hoops and various other things.
I did like, having been in civil service, I did like the joke about, we're having a time off over Christmas, so don't bother contacting us.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
There are even more egregious things, though. So Russell T Davies clearly wanted there to be a scene at the end where Millie Gibson walks into the TARDIS to find the Doctor already in there and says, "Who are you?" And he says, "I'm the Doctor." Meaning that we have, so if you include the cold open, that means the two cliffhangers or the two bits that go into the titles at the end of each time are both him saying, "I'm the Doctor," essentially. That was a bit
Oh, no, I quite like that because it's got a slightly different different meaning each time. So when he says "I'm the Doctor" the last time, he's not just saying that's what I'm called. He's saying I am, the mythical entity known as the Doctor who runs this TARDIS that's around me. Whereas the first time he's just giving her a name, and he's talking to us the first time. He's talking to her the second time, and he's inhabiting the role. So I kind of appreciated that replication.
In the first instance, though, he says a nameless woman drops the baby off, or at least she is nameless until the Doctor arrives. Now, I don't know whether that's just Russell T Davies using that language in order to set up the episode to make the viewer think, "Oh, gonna have to keep watching until this mystery is resolved," or whether that means he's foreshadowing the resolution to that mystery further down the line, like at the end of the series or something. I'm not sure whether he's setting that up to be something that's resolved. It feels like it doesn't need to be resolved. That
the mysterious woman, or
the mysterious woman who drops the baby off.
I think that's going to be resolved, isn't it? That's
surely.
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously going to be Millie Gibson being as the mysterious woman, I assume.
Dropping herself off.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I thought it was Jodie Whittaker, frankly.
Or Devani, or Susan, or Romana.
Or Dobson. Or...
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought the 13th Doctor would be the perfect person to drop her off. Clearly not the biological mother. The point I'm making is, are they going to resolve who the biological mother is? Which doesn't need to be resolved, does it? Because the whole point of the Doctor being adopted is we don't know where he comes from. So why wouldn't that necessarily be the same for...
Because it needs to have... It's Russell T Davies. It needs an emotional weight to it.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of his writing.
I think Russell T Davies writing The Timeless Children wouldn't have left it mysterious like that. I think he would have revealed that it was Davros or Emperor Palpatine and it's actually his daughter or something.
But then again, if he's deliberately setting up Millie Gibson as a sort of equal and opposite to the Doctor, then he gives her that backstory and doesn't give it a resolution because then she's no longer the equal and opposite. So it depends what he's going for. What I'm saying is he doesn't need to resolve it. It works as an analogue without the resolution. So when we choose to,
I think just to come back on that, I think there's a difference between a companion and a Doctor. A companion is limited in time in the series. So having a conclusion to their story and all the information answered is slightly more important than the Doctor, where it's actually important not to have a conclusion or a reveal. So not revealing the Doctor's parents is actually the point because he's an ongoing character and who will never die, whereas the companion will leave at some point. So I think there is a difference. So for now, they are a parallel, and it allows Ncuti Gatwa to quite nicely and quietly in the background say, "I was adopted." Which actually we've seen before with David Tennant saying, "I had a family in the past." So that's a repeat of the past. But Ncuti Gatwa's great, so he does it very nicely. But that gave us an opportunity, and it's starting the parallels. But I don't think the parallels are going to survive until the end of Millie Gibson's time on the show. I think there will be a reveal.
Probably, I guess. Yeah. I'm saying he doesn't need to, I suppose.
It doesn't need to be. No.
Going back to the subject of Russell T Davies writing Doctor Who for Disney, though, here's a question. Why do you think the series starts in May? I mean, Russell T Davies has always started his series at or about Easter.
It's an international series, so it's going to be a lot more balls to juggle on that front, I would have thought.
2 months after Easter, isn't it? Because Easter's in March.
Also, it's a shorter season. So it might just be when he wants the impact of it. That 8 episodes would be kind of where the
Well, the
you're
impact,
lopping off the old 5 episodes he used to do, when he used to do 13 episode seasons, and then
but
it goes
the
past
impact is always the Easter launch, isn't it? That's the impact. The point of impact.
It is for the, if you're just talking the UK, it's a big
This
UK,
is
but
the
abroad,
point.
I don't know.
They're broadcasting the series, presumably when Disney wants it rather than when RTD wants it.
But maybe there's also, it's less about when the season premiere is, it's when the season finale is. So maybe there's a cut-off date that they have to hit before, I don't know. So how many episodes are there? 10?
8.
8. So when would the last episode be if it's broadcast, say, mid-May?
June.
So it'd be
June to July.
Yeah.
June, July. Then, yeah, maybe there's a significance somewhere in the scheduling that means that Doctor Who has to finish at a particular time.
Is it? How does it tie in with kind of the way Disney launched the Marvel series and the Star Wars series? Is that kind of in that schedule where there's a Marvel series, a Star Wars series, and then there's, for your subscription, then there's Doctor Who, then you're back to Marvel, Star Wars.
Well,
in that way.
This is the point I'm making. The BBC and Russell T Davies always launched at Easter, and even when the series moved, it tended to launch on a bank holiday weekend because they wanted to maximize the impact of the launch. Here instead, they've said May, which sounds to me like the broadcast dates have been dictated by when Disney wants to launch the series, presumably so that it doesn't overlap with the launch of a Star Wars or a Marvel series or whatever. They're trying to slot it into a time when it'll make the most impact for a Disney audience. I'm saying Disney are wagging the tail on this one by the look of it. I mean,
if they're putting the money in, you need to get them to have something on it.
It might not be that, but to me that looks very likely to be the case. And what I'm saying is, Matt says he doesn't think Russell T Davies writes because of Disney, but he just writes to himself. I don't think that's true. I don't think
he writes for Disney. He might produce, so he might show run with Disney in mind, but I don't think he writes particularly.
Well, no, but the point I'm making is Russell T Davies as a writer is not. When he writes Doctor Who is a big field, right? And Russell T Davies as a writer has never been too interested in making the stories stand up to much scrutiny. He's always just been more interested in making the characters stand up to scrutiny. So my whole point of and they call it a Roald Dahl thing. Roald Dahl's not really what I mean, but that's as good an example as there is of something that's kind of slightly silly, slightly grotesque. Also, Millie Gibson talked about the fact that some of the episodes are a bit like Black Mirror, which isn't a million miles away from Tales of the Unexpected, and who was responsible for Tales of the Unexpected? Again, Roald Dahl, because it's storylines with a high concept and a sort of grotesque twist. So I just think that Russell T Davies is leaning more into that area of the show running because he knows that this will go somewhere where that leans it away from the sort of muscularity of Marvel.
But also, I haven't seen that much difference. I mean, I know that Russell T Davies is saying, "Oh, this gives us the opportunity to introduce a bit more fantasy in." And there's this expectation that it's going to be somehow different from before. It doesn't look that much different from before. Goblins aren't really like an intrusion of fantasy into the series. They're just aliens with a kind of weird
it's a different line logic. I mean, the thing you think is, Russell T Davies in the Vision commentary does say he takes notes from Disney, so Disney get to give feedback, and there's at least one scene in that episode which is there because Disney gave notes. So
they give notes. They give notes on the rough cut rather than does Russell T Davies hand his script in to Disney?
No, my point is not that he does that, but my point is that Russell T Davies has looked at Disney and said, right, I think this would work for them, rather than they've said to him, this is what would work for us. I think he's just repurposing it into something that is probably closer to what he would want to write anyway, but with the idea that also works for Disney. I'm not saying he's doing it because Disney have told him to, and I'm not saying he looked at the situation and said, well, surely this is what Disney want. What I'm saying is that's a factor in the way he's repurposing it, because I think and it's a little bit deeper than the sort of general tone of it. But what I'm saying is we've had 4 episodes now, and each one of the 4 episodes has had something that is slightly silly, slightly grotesque, slightly twisted, slightly like something from a twisted children's story as the sort of antagonist. So the goblins, yeah, for sure, that's obvious. But the Star Beast, a cuddly toy that turns out to be evil. Then you've got the sort of giant growing arms and legs doubles of the Doctor and the companion in Wild Blue Yonder, and the toy maker, of course. Now, all of those things in and of themselves wouldn't necessarily indicate that if they just turned up randomly scattered across a series. But that's 4 episodes in a row that have all had antagonists that feel like they could be something out of a Roald Dahl book. And even further to that point, so the 3 specials with Tennant and Tate, I thought were generally sort of regular Doctor Who, with that aspect kind of just as a slight emphasis in them. But this, 90% of this episode took place either in that flat or in the floating ship in the sky above it. That, to me, feels like the setting for a Roald Dahl story or something of that ilk. A children's story which is set inside the flat where the children live, and where the children go on an adventure in the sky immediately above the flat, where you don't actually stretch the story beyond the prologue, beyond the boundaries of that flat and the road immediately outside it and the spaceship immediately above it.
I think
That feels very Roald Dahl to me.
Yeah, I think the upcoming season will solidify it or do something with it. But at the moment, with 4 episodes, I genuinely can't see the difference between this and Russell T Davies's first writing. Because his first writing was very Roald Dahl. It was full of grotesque, Slovene, Autons, the adipose.
It's just in the Welsh writing. That's all it is.
Slovene, the Autons, the adipose had other things in between, is what I guess I'm saying.
Well, yeah, and that other stuff in between was Face of Bow. So
that's what I'm saying. Russell T Davies. But I'm saying Russell T Davies writes like this, and he's leaning more into it because it fits in between Marvel and Star Wars, and so he's leaned into that aspect of it.
I kind of think the important thing isn't necessarily the imagery; it's the way he was leaning into the coincidence bit, which I think, at its worst, could take the worst aspects of Russell T Davies plotting and hand wave them. But it's kind of more fantasy to go. These goblins are attracted by coincidence. They're attracted by accidents, by that kind of thing. That's more an overtly fantastic explanation than science fiction would.
I quite like that. So I think that feels like Russell T Davies, but possibly picking up on Stephen Moffat, but also looking at his own preferred episodes from his run, things like Midnight, presumably, and thinking these kind of concepts, these kind of taking science or communication, because I like the ropes. The
language of ropes.
Of ropes. That feels very Russell. I mean, that doesn't feel like a new thing for Russell T Davies. That just feels like he's sort of putting in stuff that he enjoyed from Doctor Who past. Again, and I quite like that bit. I quite like the coincidences bit and the accidents bit. I didn't fully follow it because I didn't really hear the dialogue, and I've only seen it once.
Yeah, I thought the sound mix was a bit off again.
I don't think you can fully follow it, really.
I like the flat. The flat is much better than the flat in Rose. I mean, you can really see kind of a sea change in sets.
Which was the Noble's house repurposed.
It was insanely big.
Well, and it was in Highgate as well. So this is another, like the Mysterious Gloves. There's a kind of a hand, and there was a bit of hand-waving dialogue explaining why they managed to get a massive flat in the middle of Highgate.
Oh, this is the last area in the whole of London where it's just still rent controlled.
Yeah.
which is slightly, I don't know. It's just slightly why I don't know.
It's all
just so it can be a Christmassy exterior.
We moved up north and we moved back.
No, you know what? I reckon it's so they could get the rooftops. Because they needed the rooftop tank.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't happen in the Powell estate, or is it the Powell estate? That wouldn't happen where Rose lives. You couldn't have a rooftop chase for budget. So they need Georgian houses, which means they need to be somewhere in North London, which means it needs to be slightly posher, which needs Highgate. But he won't have a posh companion. He'll have a salt of the earth working class companion, and it needs to be somewhere that they can effing double in Cardiff. So you get the feeling, no offense, but this is very Russell T Davies. You get the feeling that you're sort of half in London in 1 minute, half in Cardiff in the other. and at least Moffat and Chibnall took it somewhere else, took it to Bristol or Gloucester or
Some of this was filmed in Bristol.
Manchester.
No, he's saying the set.
Yeah.
He's saying the setting.
Yeah.
Saying Russell T Davies insists on setting it in London.
It just feels it just feels kind of floaty and dislocated because it's supposed to be London, but it's not.
But the background had like valleys and stuff.
Yeah.
Not London. It patently wasn't London. And
I think you said on the thing it's because they didn't have quite enough money to do all the backgrounds, so that's why that happened.
Sure. Let's talk about go back to a point that I was trying to make earlier and got cut off, which was the sort of we talked about you mentioned the illogicalities, and for sure there were, but I thought way worse was the character illogicalities. So it felt to me like he got halfway through the script and didn't know where he was going to take the story. And then in order to pull the story round to the place where he wanted it to end, he had to kind of change who the characters were, but didn't go back and write that in at the start. So the story starts with the Doctor learning the language of ropes, because what the Doctor does is make sense of the world around him and understands what's going on around him. And then at the end of the story, because he needed there to be a scene where the Doctor's already in the TARDIS before Millie Gibson turns up, he throws in this weird bit where the Doctor says, oh, maybe I'm to blame for all the bad luck that's been going on, and goes off in a huff to the TARDIS. Where did that come from? Why does he think he's responsible for the bad luck that's been dogging Davina McCall? It's an entire...
I didn't get the huff. I thought he went off to the TARDIS to try and fix things, didn't he?
Yes.
But he doesn't, does he? He just goes off to the TARDIS to wait for Millie Gibson because Russell T Davies wants a scene where Millie Gibson walks into the TARDIS at the end.
Oh, right at the end.
Yeah, he says, oh, I'm responsible for the bad luck. He's about to go back to the flat to see Millie Gibson one more time. Says, oh, maybe I'm responsible for the luck, and turns around and goes off to the TARDIS instead with his tail between his legs. It's like, what the is that all about?
Instead of giving Millie Gibson a chance to work things out across that scene.
Why does she need to work things out? He tells her
she needs to show, is she worth going with the Doctor? That's the thing with the companion. She has to earn it.
She works it out in the first half of the episode, and then in the second half of the episode, he takes her back to square one.
She doesn't work it out. She doesn't work it out in the first half of the episode. He gives her hints.
Oh no!
He never actually
says a piece of dialogue where it shows definitively that she works it out. In the first
time
half.
traveler.
No, yeah, all that stuff on the rope ladder. I think watching it the second time, I picked it up. I didn't notice it the first time. On the rope ladder, I think there's a line of dialogue which shows that she's taken it in and that she's understood it and that she's worked it out. And it's like a little throwaway line, but it's kind of that's the point where she proves to him that she's worth taking. And then he takes her back to square one and makes her do the whole thing again in slow motion in the second half of the episode, for the sake of people who've
because she got wiped from the timeline and came back.
Yeah,
so he has to make sure. It's easy to resolve.
The whole thing is Russell T Davies engineering the end of the episode, but not bothering to go back and change how he started the episode because he'd already written that stuff.
I don't think it's as complicated. I think it's a fairly simple, straightforward story. I don't think he's done the sort of Stephen Moffat of writing this on post-it notes on the wall to try and make it all fit together. I think he's just written it.
That's what I mean. He's just written it. He's not bothered to make it make sense. He's just written it without bothering to go back and make it make sense.
And to be fair to him, the logic of the plot for me worked perfectly when I watched it a single time. I didn't see any flaws in the actual plot, in the sequencing of things or the characters. I saw issues in the sort of the kind of the microscopic moments of trying to make the fostering work around Christmas, trying to fit Christmas in, trying to make the gloves work.
I'm talking about the characters. I'm talking about the characters changing.
Yeah, I'm saying I didn't have any problem with that.
There's at least explicitly one instance of that in the whole series, because with the whole, I'm sure we'll come to it, the Mrs. Flood thing. Because she, obviously, spoilers, guys. At the start, she doesn't know what a TARDIS is. She's saying, "What's this box? What's that?" And then you get to the end of the episode, she does know what one is.
Yeah, that was confusing.
So, I think there's been, I think it's been changed.
I don't think it was that confusing. She's just a mysterious character who's kind of masking herself to start with, and
Possibly.
then revealing a bit
But
by
why would
breaking
she
the
need to
fourth
mask
wall.
herself? To
There's also a
That's
really
who she
bad
masks
bit
because
of
she's
There's
she's
also a
in
really
disguise.
bad bit of direction then, because the director gives her a bit to do where she clearly doesn't recognise what's going on, and that's in the performance of the internal character rather than the external character.
So it's a weird progression, but I think she's in disguise. So to the characters around her, she's this nice neighbor. But the weirdness comes because she breaks this fourth wall and she's effectively talking to us, the audience, and that's when she breaks character and her real self is revealed. So for Lee, that would burn out his tiny little mind because he hates fourth wall breaking, although he loved this episode, so he didn't pick up on that. But I think that fourth wall breaking is
There
where
were two instances in this episode
where we're shown as the viewer her mysterious character. I don't think there's an inconsistency there. I think it's just a weird kind of revelation, because normally it's a revelation to, like, it's Missy in the end of Deep Breath, where she's sort of revealed to be a little bit of a weird character. Whereas this, it's kind of revealed straight to us by she's talking to us. And I kind of like that, because again, that's at least that's something different. At least it's something a bit weird and mysterious. And she's got a good name, Mrs. Floods. It
sounds like something out of a Paul Mars book, doesn't it?
Well, it sounds like sounds like Mr. Saxon, or I mean, it's a classic. Again, RTD does this with sort of fairly generic names, but
it's Russell T Davies repeating himself as well, though, isn't it? Because he had the flood in Waters of Mars, so it's a name he's used. Well, it's a name he's used before as a name.
Well, it's a word he's used before as a word.
Well,
but I mean, it's repeating himself. He's repeating himself in the sense that he's taken just a fairly standard generic name, and he's going to make it mysterious throughout the series, presumably, or it's supposed to be a long burning thing, according to him, which might be next series, or it might be in the series after.
Yeah. Do we have any sort of suggestions as to who we might think it is? Or
Rani, Susan, Romana.
There's a lot of people saying
the Master.
There's a lot of people saying it might be the Rani. But Millie Gibson or Ncuti Gatwa has said they'd like to do a story with the Rani, which suggests to me that it isn't, because if it was, they'd already know, so they wouldn't be saying, I'd like to do a story with the Rani, would they? Or maybe that's a double bluff.
That's what I think. It's that interview's prompted it, isn't it? And also, Doctor Who fans are just prone, as any human beings are, to pattern recognition. Well, who's the we have to have seen them before.
But also, it does kind of make sense for the Rani to come back this series, because we know that Mel is potentially in the last two episodes of the series, and Mel has a connection with the Rani. So I don't think it will be, but
Mel's going to be an ongoing character for the next few years, though, presumably. I mean, there's a good chance of it. Now that they've built that unit base, they're going to be using that at least once a year. Couple of episodes a year, probably, for the foreseeable future, right? So
Also, you've got to say Yasmin Finney's going to be a recurring character by the look of it.
Yeah, so it would make sense that those two, and Kate Lethbridge-Stewart, and the Vinex or whatever it's called, that was the alien monster or whatever. Yeah, it makes sense that all of those will be in at least an episode, if not a couple of episodes each year, I would expect. So that could turn out to, that doesn't necessarily mean that has to be this year, but that could be coming up like 2-3 years time and be resolved. So I don't know, it feels to me like it's going to be a new character, because it's Russell T Davies, right? And he doesn't really, I mean, he's brought back the classics, but character wise, the only two characters he's brought back are Davros and the Master, aren't they? The rest of them are just races like Daleks and Cybermen.
It's Sarah Jane as well.
Yeah, I suppose she's a protagonist rather than an antagonist, but yeah. But yeah, I mean, and those are the three most recognizable, most significant characters, I guess, of a certain generation's memories of the classic series, right? So it could be the Rani, but it doesn't feel to me like it would be. And then also, they have this thing about Time Lords recognizing each other, right? So I don't know if it would be a Time Lord anyway, but just somebody who recognizes Time Lord technology. I don't know.
Well, the Doctor doesn't tend to recognise a master until he or she whips their disguise off and goes, "Oh, it's me." So
And does the Doctor meet Mrs. Flood in this episode?
Yes, there's a scene outside the flat.
Okay.
At the end, conversation. They have a conversation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it does definitely happen. So yeah, and it's a conversation rather than just a walks past. So yeah, who knows? I don't know. The Doctor and Ruby Sunday do some singing.
I like the songs. I didn't like the goblins particularly. I thought the goblins were a bit anonymous and flat and underdeveloped.
Well,
I like their language and their philosophy, and the choreography was very nice, and that the actual design was fine. But if you ask me, will the goblins come back to Doctor Who for a rematch? No, they won't, because they're that kind of second tier. They're adipose. They're second tier anonymous villains. They don't have a personality or a kind of an impact.
But there's no interaction between the goblins and the Doctor and Ruby at all. Even the bits where they capture them and they tie them up happens off screen.
Yeah.
The only sort of interaction really is where the Doctor turns and says, "Start the song up again," and the song is in English, which means that the TARDIS is either translating or the goblins are speaking English, and at least two of the goblins speak English in that scene, and yet neither of them speaks to the Doctor and Ruby, nor do Doctor and Ruby speak back to them. It's so weird to have a monster, and the Doctor and Ruby have got several scenes with this creature, and yet there's no actual interaction between the two. That's all weird.
On Doctor Who Unleashed, described the goblins as an elemental enemy, which I think they meant, this is a different sort of enemy because they're from myth and legend, and they're, it's fantasy bringing up, which I completely do. I think they're just trying to do this to sell the series as something different. But actually, if you think of them as elemental in the sense of they're like the weather, they're like, it's like a storm coming in. You don't talk to a storm. A storm is anonymous. It just comes in, it just affects things, instigates things, and then passes by.
And yet there's the song.
Well, and then there's the song, but that's, Russell T Davies wanting a song. But that doesn't, again,
the song. I mean, the song, it's fine that there's a song and that Ncuti and Millie sing it. I was fine with all that. But what I didn't like was the fact that there's a song, and then it tries to paint the goblins as something that doesn't do English and some of the lyrics in that song were so sort of basic and nothingy, but also weirdly specific as well. So it just...
mostly they remind me of the adipose. It's the cute little adversaries.
But for the song...
Yeah,
the adipose didn't have the adipose talking English and running around.
No,
singing.
You had Sarah Lancashire to do that for them, didn't
exactly.
you?
And that's what you lacked this time. Is you lacked, a human. The Goblin King didn't have that kind of. He wasn't Jabba the Hutt, basically.
It's kind of impressive that she.
Yeah, the song proved that the goblins speak English, so there should have been a goblin spokesperson, and I suppose it should have been the Goblin King. But the fact that it wasn't just left the episode feeling really badly stitched together to me.
It's quite impressive that Ncuti Gatwa makes an impression without having that big iron dotting against an adversary.
That's true.
Yeah, so the singing, the dancing. The new sonic screwdriver, the gloves, everything else, all of that was fine, but just the rest of it.
I kind of wonder. Is it in the trailer or in the episode? There's like that. There's no such thing as monsters. Maybe they're trying to get away from that explicitly adversarial mindset with
possibly. I think that in the trailer for next time, I think that's more. Russell T Davies's humanist side. There's no such thing as monsters. There's just aliens we haven't got to know yet. And then when they do evil things, then they're monsters. But
yes,
at the moment,
that's when you can impale them on a church spire.
Yeah.
I tell you one thing
which is fine, which I like. I think that's a good sentiment. I mean, it's repeated endlessly, and it's also contradictory. I mean, it's a completely hypocritical thing, because the Doctor quite happily comes in, and if the baddie looks like a big blobby alien with big sharp teeth, he will shoot at it or run away.
Yeah. It's a bit like David Tennant's Doctor. The first line, the end of his first episode, I'm the Doctor who doesn't give second chances, and then in the very next episode, he's giving Cassandra a second chance, right?
Yeah.
It's a bit like that. Russell T Davies has the Doctor say shit, and then he goes and contradicts it in the very next episode. I really
that's Doctor Who.
Yeah, exactly. I really like the scene with the policeman where he tells them about the marriage proposal. I really like the twist on that. The fact that you've paid full price for the ring is what's going to make her say yes. Of course, I suppose there's another version of that. The fact that you didn't wait until it was in the sales and save some money, which you could have spent on something else, means she'll say no. But I like the way he did it.
Yeah, it's like the line in the McGann, isn't it? Where he just tells the guy, but this time you get to see the Doctor working it out. It's almost like the Doctor is Sherlock Holmes rather than just, I've got knowledge of the future, this is what happens thing.
But it also comes from, is it Remembrance, where the Doctor sort of says under his breath it'll be twins, which nobody ever seems to have sort of twigged that's the Doctor sort of, or is it Curse of Fate?
No, in the future,
yeah.
It's one.
Yeah. Is there anything more we want to say about this episode? I just thought this is 4 episodes now where there's really not been much of a plot. And it's just been about the characters, which I guess is all right. But if it carries on like that, it's going to start to become an issue, I think.
We really haven't said enough about Ncuti Gatwa, have we? I don't think.
No, I guess.
He's very good. He's very good.
Yeah, it's more emotionally intelligent in a lot of ways. He's more empathetic to people rather than, say, Tennant waltzing in and...
I was worried he would remind me of Tennant in that you'd have this sort of boundless enthusiasm that's not really tempered by anything and becomes a sort of annoying shtick. But it is tempered with Ncuti Gatwa, isn't it? So there is this enthusiasm, but it's not quite as boundless, and it doesn't express itself in such irritating ways. So I'm very much more on board with Ncuti Gatwa than I was with David Tennant. And we've had it's beautiful, it's gorgeous, but we haven't quite had a catchphrase, and it's good that we haven't had a catchphrase in the way that we had catchphrases first time around with Russell T Davies. So I'm hoping there doesn't become one. But it feels like Russell T Davies is doing the Doctor in just a slightly less irritating way, with all the same features, but just molded slightly more intelligently. And what we've got at the moment, because you're getting this after the sort of David Tennant going through rehab thing, whatever way you want to look at it, is you're getting a Doctor who's unfettered by backstory.
Yeah,
but again, you've also got him mentioning the adoption and the fact that Millie Gibson's character is also adopted makes me think that Russell T Davies will leave it a couple of episodes, but then gradually. So I think I predicted this anyway, but I think Russell T Davies will gradually start using the timeless child concept as his sort of time war for this version of the Doctor. So if he does need to lean on a darker side of the Doctor, it'll be that I don't know who I am thing.
It's used as a moment of empathy here more than a moment of continuity.
But I can see it becoming a recurring, not a regular, but a recurring theme. And if he wants to lean on a darker side for Ncuti Gatwa, that'll be where he leans. I don't know who
but the only place that can go to narratively is trying to find out his past.
I'm not saying it anywhere narratively. I'm saying it's a character thing. Russell T Davies likes to have a darker side for his characters, doesn't he? He likes to have his angst.
Yeah, but I can't.
Selfish, I would say, rather than dark.
Either way, I
don't know how it's going to change his character. That's my point. The Doctor's always been pretty much an orphan, whether it's been explicitly in the story or he's either orphaned from his home planet, or he's orphaned from the last companion he's had, or he's an orphan.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's
kind of the emotional trauma Russell wants to give him. Replacing the Time War from 2005.
Yeah.
And also, that now is the first time where he doesn't know what his home planet is. He doesn't know what species he is. And so that can be something that Russell T Davies leans on in order to give the character darker moments later on. Russell T Davies will do it. He won't just leave the Doctor as this character unfettered by angst. It's not in
No,
T.
I think he
Davies'
said that
character.
he said that in the commentary for the gig, or he said, "Oh, that lasts about half an hour or whatever." So,
So I've not seen the commentary, but yeah. So I'm
that's for
pretty
the
sure.
gig, not.
Well, you can't keep actors.
I've not seen the commentary for that either, John.
You can't keep actors in a role for that long without giving them something other than just running and jumping to do. So obviously there is going to be angst. I suspect it's going to be shaped through the events of the series and be more to do with Ruby's backstory than the Doctor's, I think. But that's why also I think it'll be interesting to see how Ncuti Gatwa develops in the role, because at the moment he's had effectively one episode of kind of running and jumping, and he's been very good at it and very convincing. It's when the character starts having to change, because this is modern television and characters have to change.
But this is kind of the point. Ruby's backstory is the Doctor's backstory, even to the point where the Doctor now doesn't know what species he is. And in the science fiction of the series, neither does Ruby, because they've already pointed out at great length that if she was a human being, they didn't phrase it like this because they didn't have this point of reference. If she was a human being, there would be some record somewhere of something to do with her DNA. Somewhere they pointed out.
No. Hang on.
No, I think you're reading too much there.
Yeah. They just.
I don't think I am. I'm not saying she's not human.
My DNA isn't on anybody's record. It's not a human thing to have your DNA on record. It's just
Matt's
it's
not
a
human.
human
We've
thing.
just got this Christmas Day revelation.
No, it's a human thing that somebody within your family group would have their DNA on record.
Yeah, but that's not what they said in the episode. Davina McCall was talking about specifically her parents didn't have DNA because
or brothers or sisters or uncles or cousins. That was in the dialogue, Matt. Brothers, sisters.
Yes, but that's not an unusual thing at the moment, and it wasn't framed as an unusual thing. It's just sometimes it happens that there is.
From my understanding, this has happened on that actual show that they're referencing with Davina McCall.
Yeah, I mean, surely it's a very common thing. DNA is very good for telling if you're part German, part English, part German, part Norse, but not for like, oh, you're related. This is your uncle, or this is your father, or this is your cousin. That's just the way it is. It's not suggesting potentially. I mean, she might be an alien, but I suspect she is.
I mean, that to me is foreshadowing for something that's coming back later.
Oh, okay.
Possibly, it's maybe reminiscent of the Paul Abbott storyline from season 1 that never got used.
Maybe not, but it seemed to me like they were going an awful long way to point out that Ruby Sunday is not the same as everybody else.
Could be. It's just exceptionalism for the companions as usual, which is part of the show's format at the minute.
Well, okay.
I mean, there is clearly a mystery to Ruby Sunday.
Yes.
To do with her Harry Potter delivery to the church. So there's something special about Ruby Sunday. I think possibly the connection with the doctor's adoption and foundlingness was a good way of forging a connection with them in this episode. But it's whether that develops into anything means resurrecting Timeless Children, and my objection to the Timeless Children stands that it just doesn't go anywhere. And Unleashed talks about bioregeneration as being something that shakes up the Doctor Who universe. No, it doesn't. The Doctor Who universe continues exactly as it has before. It just gives David Tennant an opportunity to retire to Chiswick somewhere. That's all it does. It doesn't shake up the Doctor Who universe.
Get one in his pants. That's what they want.
I mean, this is all classic kind of Bad Wolf television production trying to drum up mystery and drama. When
the timeless more Russell T Davies, isn't it?
The Timeless Children thing doesn't change the Doctor's character, but it does mean that the Doctor is a mystery again, as the Doctor was not before. The Doctor's not been a mystery since 1969, so it doesn't change the series, but it does change something about the character. or rather reinstate something about the character that had been lost. So I think the Timeless Children is
I'm not saying it doesn't do anything. I'm just saying it doesn't necessarily lead to a grand dramatic arc in the future without actually kind of diminishing it. So I think it's set up as being just an end in itself. The Doctor has a mysterious past. Okay, we can sort of move on from the IKEA Gallifreyan Arc of Infinity. We don't have to go back there anymore. That's the main thing it does.
That's what both the McCoy and the Chibnall thing were for.
It's a reboot. It's a reboot engine, basically, which is fine. But
that's what it always does, isn't it? 5 Doctors ends with the Doctor saying, "Right, let's go off and do exactly what we did in 1963." Right?
Yeah, that's how it all started. Yep.
Exactly. That's what Doctor Who does periodically. Takes the Doctor to the end of, a length of string and snaps him right back to the start, or a length of elastic, I should say. Snaps him right back to the start of it, and then you carry on as if none of the past 5 years or 10 years or whatever had ever really happened. Apart from recognizing Daleks or whatever. Okay, the next Time trailer. I mean, we all liked Ncuti Gatwa, though, right?
Absolutely. I think that's the whole point of the episode. You get you on board with him as well.
I mean, it's a great start for Ncuti Gatwa. This isn't the real test for his character or his portrayal of the Doctor. That comes. So Matt Smith, I thought, 11th Hour. Oh, he's very good in 11th Hour. I'm not quite sure about it. It depends on what happens. It takes 2 seasons for me to look back and think, oh, wow, they've really nailed it, because I really have an affection for this particular version of the character. I want to see them again. I'm not looking forward to their leaving, blah, blah, blah. And so at the moment, he's given a good foundation that he can run and jump without doing his back in or doing his knee in. And he can, he's good at moving, and he's shown various degrees of emotion in this episode, but it depends on the season. And the next Time trailer suggests he's going to be inhabiting various characters in this season. Yeah. Characters not outside the Doctor, but sort of variations of this character.
Which is what the Doctor always should be anyway, I think. And I think Russell T Davies is just looking at something that the series hasn't really done that it probably should have, and just giving it a bit more of that, I think. John.
Yeah. Sorry, John.
Well, just Ncuti Gatwa.
It gets more to it. It's more the empathetic, smaller scenes he gets. It's like where goes and see Cherry Sunday. It's almost the opposite of that scene with Jackie in Rose. Where anything could happen. No, Ncuti Gatwa, he's flirting. He's quite happy in that. It's really nice for him to be straight in his kind of his own skin, quite comfortable. Just he is the Doctor straight away. Did find it interesting the note. I think it's the one note that Russell said Disney gave him was, we want to see more of him earlier, so they wanted to establish him more
rather than like the Christmas Invasion.
Or even in Rose, where it's from Rose's point of view, so the Doctor's in and out in that first 15 minutes or so.
This is quite similar to that, though, because it's 18 minutes before Ncuti Gatwa properly gets to enter the story. He's sort of this character who drops in and out a little bit in the first quarter of an hour.
Yeah, but again, that was that scene with the snowman falling off. That was introduced at Disney's request, essentially.
And that makes sense, because Ncuti Gatwa was the kind of the international film star, social media phenomenon at this point, whereas Millie Gibson's very good, but she's still the British,
just been in Coronation Street.
British star that's just been in Coronation Street. So she's definitely more of a parochial presence. Ncuti Gatwa is the international appeal to this.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Also, why Ruby Sunday? It seems like it feels like he missed a slight trick in calling her Ruby Sunday, naming the first bit after the road where the church was, and then giving her a name like that feels like something out of a children's book or something, and
that's not incorporating Cherry Sunday and what's it, Lulubelle for the baby. So, what?
What's going on here, Russell T Davies? But it feels like if he wanted Ruby Sunday as a name, instead of putting it on Christmas Eve 2004, he could have moved it to Boxing Day 2004, which was a Sunday, and named her after the place she was found and the day she was found on, which would have given the character just that little bit more sort of children's story magic. Whereas now, Sunday just feels like a really weird surname for that family to have.
I don't know. Is it an even unusual? So I've never heard. I never don't think I've met anyone called Sunday.
Or any day of the week, I don't think. Trying to think. I mean, I remember the Thursday books where Mouse was named Thursday, but that was a forename rather than a surname. But a day of the week as a surname, I can't think of any.
Endeavour. The one.
Is it Friday in Dragnet? Joe Friday? Or something like
Joe Friday in Dragnet.
Oh, right.
Well, actually, the Thursday in Endeavour is probably a riff on the Joe Friday from Dragnet, I guess. I did have an issue with.
And again, they're both fictional rather than actual people.
I'm sure. I'm sure there'll be people named after. I knew a Dave Christmas once. That's
Yeah, but my point is, I think because he obviously landed on the name and then created the family afterwards.
Yeah,
I think it would have. But given how he's given her a first name that relates to the story, that the whole name feels like it ought to relate to the story. Making it a day of the week as well just feels like that should have been incorporated.
My bigger issue is the line that Ncuti Gatwa just manages to successfully deliver, which is, "Oh, your name's Sunday. Oh, that's a coincidence. It's a Sunday." And I don't. No, it's not a coincidence that it's Sunday. It's just
it happens every
7 days.
Unless that's going to be a deep, dark kind of repeated thing. Why is her name Sunday? Maybe there's
why is every episode set on a Sunday?
Yeah.
Is it a dig at Chibnall here?
Yeah.
It just, it was a bit. I don't know. The whole thing just felt slightly weirdly clumsy when there was a sort of poetic way that it could have been done and wasn't. Don't know. Do we want to? I don't know how quickly you two have got to rush off, because I did say we'd be finished by a minute ago. But if you don't have to dash off anywhere soon, we'll just have a very quick word on the trailer.
Okay.
So the Beatles.
Fine.
I'm not good for that.
So the Regency.
As I said privately, if they could get Christopher Eccleston to reprise John Lennon, that would be great.
Oh, Capaldi's played one of the Beatles, hasn't he?
Has he?
Yeah, I can't remember which it was years ago now.
My only concern about the Beatles is that RTD's seen the movie yesterday and thinks it's good. And thinks maybe I could riff on that, because yesterday is obviously like Doctor Who catnip.
That's frighteningly plausible.
Yeah.
Apparently, it's the Beatles in 1963 at Abbey Road. Is that right?
Apparently, the Beatles. There are Beatles forums online that have been criticising the portrayal of the Beatles from the clips in the trip. I can't remember them criticising Abbey Road.
I'll look it up before the episode. I've got Mark Lewison books downstairs.
I saw a comment that said that in Abbey Road the producer's studio was on another level, whereas here it wasn't. So it's inaccurate. Abbey Road was inaccurate, but not the actual presence of Abbey Road. I think it probably is. I don't know.
Yeah, well, we know they went to Abbey Road by 1969.
Yeah.
It's just, like 1963 feels really early to be making that reference. It feels weird, but it feels like he's setting it in 1963 purely because of the Doctor Who thing, rather than because of the Beatles thing. I get, but we know nothing. We've seen like 2 shots, right? We'll find out.
Yeah.
Giant slugs, we knew about that.
Yeah.
There was a talk at one point that was a Stephen Moffat episode. Now it seems that that's not a Stephen Moffat episode. Who knows? I don't know if there's anything more to bring up.
No, it's the real thing then is that obviously we know Unit's back. And the first episode looks set on a spaceship because we're clipping the Unleashed.
Is that the first episode?
Yes. Yeah, it's in a more extended clip on Unleashed. Have you heard what the title of the first episode's supposed to be?
No.
Space Babies.
Okay, that makes sense, because in the background of one of the shots in the Next Time trailer, you can see babies in the tank.
Oh yes, I think I've seen a photograph or something. So, but then that's 2 episodes in a row where it's repeating something about babies. Either it's deliberate,
thematic.
Either it's deliberate or else it's like a really weird accident.
I think there's got to be at some point there is going to be repetition between one episode and another, and I say so long as they don't repeat like goblins, but in a different form. Or
but babies is even more specific than goblins, really.
Maybe I don't know how.
They're human beings, aren't they? Isn't it?
Yeah.
So
But how
you're
many
gonna see
stories
them at
are
some point.
about babies? This was a story about the abduction of a baby. The next one's a story about babies. You don't get stories about babies very often.
That's because you've got limited things you can do with them on a TV set.
Yeah, so it's got to be deliberate that there's 2 in a row, or else it's just this really weird coincidence.
So if it was something like, I don't know, a generation ship where babies are developed as they go, so a bit like Doctor's Daughter, but doing things like that, that's going to be a variation. So that would be different. So it's not necessarily if it's about the abduction of babies by an alien race, then I'll concede that there is repetition that they probably should have thought of. But I think there are other things that they can avoid for that, and I don't think that's a very common thing.
Well, splitting the 2 plots up so that they're not in consecutive episodes might have been an idea then if it is coincidence. I don't know, just to have babies be the central factor in 2 episodes in a row just feels weird. Anyway, let's give a score to the Church on Ruby Road. Matt?
7? I think it's no, it's 7 because I'm being generous, because I'm naturally against Christmas specials. So I don't like them. It takes a lot to get me to like them. But as Christmas specials go, this is still, I think, preferable for me than the grim, dour Chris Chibnall seasonal specials set in warehouses and abandoned wastelands and stuff like this. At least this feels a bit more Christmassy.
Me? Okay, I'm going to be generous as well. Very generous, and give it a 6. I mean, Ruby's mum, I've watched it twice and I've forgotten who she is and what she's like already. Her grandmother is fun, but Ruby's mum is just nothing of a character. John, score out of 10.
Yeah, I think 7's about right. Again, because it does what it needs to do. It introduces Ncuti Gatwa, gives him a chance to shine. By the end of it, you define the relationship between Doctor and companion. But the story is kind of, it's a mid-level, like any of these kind of introductions of Christmas specials. It's an excuse to, get to know the characters rather than a story in its own right that you go back for on its merits. So, just a great Doctor, great companion. I like the possibilities, that new style, that kind of Roald Dahl fantasy style, as you refer to it. But, it's not... I don't see myself going back to it that often. But again, I'd want to see a rewatch to see if I've missed anything.
Yeah, sure. Right, we'll be back in May to talk about the next episodes. And at some point, some of us will be back to talk about the second Doctor, but I don't see that happening anytime soon.
No, it will happen. It's going to happen.
Until then, I was JR.
I was John.
I was Matt.
And we will speak again soon.